This lecture is a continuation of the photography module and will discuss the current use of digital cameras and digital images for photography. So to start, a digital image is made of individual elements that are arranged in a grid of rows and columns. And each one of these individual elements is called a pixel or picture element. And each pixel is a specific color. So if we were to zoom in on a digital image like you see here, you could see that at the foundation or core of that digital image is simply individual squares of color that we call pixels. And each one of those pixels has only one specific color. But as we zoom out, we no longer see those squares and instead just see a transition of color. So the number of color possibilities that we have in a digital image is going to affect the quality level of that digital image. So as you see here, let's start with a grayscale or a black and white image. With an 8-bit image, we have a possible number of 256 values or shades of gray, this particular image. And we get that, if you look here as an example, with an 8-bit image we have 8 units here, and each one of those units can be either a 0 or 1 because it's a digital file. And so if all 8 of those are zeros, that's going to be the color black. Whereas if all others are white, all of the units are 1, then that color is going to be white. So for a black and white image, the majority of colors are going to be somewhere, some combination like you see here of zeros and 1, which is going to be different colors or shades of gray. But there are 256 because we have 8 units, and unit has 2 different options, either 0 or 1. So we can calculate that by 2 to the 8th power, which is 256. But that's just for a black and white image. Most time for working with color image, we have 3 overlaid image or channels to work from. So a color is going to be an RGB, which is for red, green, and blue. So we have 3 different channels, green and blue, overlaid onto each other. And so in an image, each channel is going to have a possible 256 values or shades, just like black and white. However, because we have an RGB, we have 3 channels, then to calculate the number of possible color possibilities, we would take 256 to the 3rd power, which equals over 16 million different possible values. So in a standard color 8-bit image, there are over 16 million different color possibilities for the individual squares or those pixels of color. If we were to increase that to 12-bit, we can increase the number of values or shades possible. So here you can see with that color, so once again, with each one of those pixels, each one of those individual squares, with a standard 8-bit color image, we can have over 16 million different color possibilities for each one of those squares. We refer to this as true color because this actually goes even further or beyond the number of colors that our eyes can distinguish. Just like there are sounds that we can't hear, there are colors that we can't see. And in an 8-bit digital image, the number of color possibilities goes even beyond what we can see with our human eyes. This graphic here just demonstrates as we increase the number of possible colors, how that increases the quality of the picture. So if you remember, we were talking about an 8-bit image, but in that case we had 3 channels, so in total we have a 24-bit pixel image, and this would be standard for the color images, the image quality that we normally take. But because there are so many, there are 16 million different color possibilities, as we change from one color to another, there's a nice transition. But as we decrease that down, you can see here in the top graphic that as the number of possible colors decreases, then the quality is going to decrease, because as we change from one color to another, we can actually see that edge. We can begin to kind of see the individual squares, and that reduces the quality. We refer to this as pixelated or jagginess in terms of the color, the quality of that image. So as we talked about before, that a digital image is made up of a grid of rows and columns of pixels, and that grid is referred to as the image resolution. So each image is going to have a resolution in itself, which is the number of horizontal by vertical pixels. And you can see here that the cameras that we use have different resolution sizes, and that's going to correlate with the resolution of the image, and it's going to relate to what we can do with that particular image. So as the megapixel of the camera increases, the resolution, the potential resolution of our images increases. But it's important to note here that the standard size of a monitor is somewhere in this range from 1200 to 1600. And so if you wanted to take a picture and you wanted that to fill the whole screen, the size of it, the megapixel of the camera, does not need to be very large. However, if we wanted to take and print a poster print on our wall of that color image, then this would not be big enough. However, as we move down to between the 6 and 11 megapixel range, that would be large enough. Today, it's hard to find a camera that has a megapixel that's less than 6. Most cameras today will have a megapixel of 8, 10, 12 megapixels. There are even high-quality professional cameras that have up to 50 megapixels, which is quite large. But again, it's important to note here that for most cases, that a lower megapixel is just fine. If all you're doing is putting the pictures on a computer, you're only going to put them on the web, such as Facebook, that the megapixel does not need to be very large. However, you can always decrease the size of an image, but you can't increase the size. So it's better to kind of use a little bit of a larger setting just in case you decide down the road that you do actually want to print that out. This graphic here just kind of demonstrates the different size differences if you were wanting to print something. But as I said, you can, if you start with the 5 megapixel, you can decrease that down for, let's say, web use. But if this is your original and you try to make it bigger and you want to print that out, what you're doing is essentially stretching those individual squares. You're making those squares bigger, which is going to reduce the quality. So it's always good practice to use a little bit of a higher resolution just in case you want to actually make that print. However, with the resolution, cameras have their resolution, which is the number of pixels that a camera records in a single image, and that maximum capability is described as a megapixel. The megapixel is a very common statistic or description of a camera that is advertised, and typically just because a camera has a larger megapixel doesn't necessarily make the quality better. It has the potential, but there are a lot of other components that affect the quality of a camera. But having a larger megapixel does provide you with the opportunities to do different things with it. Now, when it comes to the resolution on the camera, that megapixel is the maximum capability. But most cameras, even cell phone, smartphone cameras, will have the ability to reduce that megapixel and to change settings here. So again, you might have an 8 megapixel camera, but you may never need this large of a resolution. So there's nothing wrong with reducing that down a little bit to kind of one of these medium ranges to where you're going to save space on your device and lower that resolution. Because the larger the resolution, the more space it's going to take on your memory card, and the less number of pictures or different data you're going to be able to store. This graphic here just kind of demonstrates if we let's say we have a 1 gigabyte memory card. If we have our camera set at 3 megapixels, we can take over 700 pictures, whereas if we have that maxed out at the 8 megapixel, we would only going to roughly be able to do over 200 pictures with that. Now, today it's so easy to find storage memory cards that have such large spaces. An 4 or 8 gigabyte is pretty common, but you can easily go up to 32 or 64 gigabytes for a memory card, a storage device, which is just a massive amount of space. And so the number of pictures, the amount of data that we can put on those is really incredible, and so we're really not limited anymore by the megapixel number there. However, it is important to note here, to come back to this graphic here, if you think about if you have, let's say, a 16 gig smartphone, which is a lot of space. However, once you get all your apps and your music, if you have some videos, you can easily fill that up. So one simple way to save some space on your device if it is starting to fill up is to, well, first of all, get pictures off of it, but as you're taking your pictures, lower that resolution down to kind of the middle level to where you'll really affect your size and the amount of things you can do. The other important component of a camera in terms of the image quality is the camera compression. And this compression affects the print quality. So the camera compression is really limited to just the print. It really doesn't have an effect on what you're going to see in terms of if you're looking on your monitor, on the web, on your mobile device. The compression really affects in terms of what's going to happen if you want to print this picture out. But the camera compression is sometimes referred to as the PPI, or the pixels per inch, or the DPI, or dots per inch. And most cameras have 2 or 3 settings options here, and so we can choose from a normal versus fine or a smooth versus stepped option to identify that compression or the quality. So down here, this is a graphic of a camera setting here, a Canon camera. And you can see here that it has the L, M, and S. This stands for large, medium, and small. This is referring to the resolution. And so having a large resolution or medium. So in this case, this medium resolution you can see here is 3400 by 2300, which is quite large. It's plenty big enough for anything that most of us would need to do. The other little graphic here, though, affects the compression. So you can see here there's kind of a stair-step graphic, and here's a smooth graphic. So this is referring to that camera compression, or the fine versus normal, or the smooth versus step. So choosing this fine option is going to increase that camera compression, the pixels per inch or dots per inch, and is going to give you a higher quality image if you want to print that image out. It's going to have no effect on the look of that image on a computer monitor or on the web, just because the monitors aren't going to display that level of compression anyway. And so as you choose between these two, the fine is obviously going to take more space. The file size is going to be much larger with the compression, but you're also going to have a higher quality print possibility for that. So again, if you knew that the images that you were taking with the camera, all you were going to do is put them up on Facebook or somewhere on the web, you don't need the fine option. You could go with the stair step, and in this case, really even the medium setting is quite large. You could bring that down to a small size and be just fine. But however, once again, if you decide down the road after you took the picture that, wow, this would really make a great print, you would really want that fine setting. So in general, it's good to kind of go with the medium level and go with the fine option here. This produces you an image that has great image compression and a quite large resolution, but it doesn't maximize the space that is taking on your device. And so however, if you knew you were taking images that might go into a large poster that you're wanting to put on your wall, then you want to increase that up to this larger setting here. In general, kind of as an example here, the normal versus fine. The normal will typically do about 72 pixels per inch. And if you were to take this and print a large print, once again you would move back and you'd kind of get into that pixelated image quality. You'd be able to see that. Whereas with the fine setting or the smooth setting, that typically captures anywhere from 200, 300 pixels per inch, and which is the target that you would want for actually print quality. Lastly here, just kind of a demonstration. Again, if you were to print the normal or the fine versus normal, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you wanted to print a large picture and you had it set at that normal or stepped option, this is the direction that that image is going to go as compared to maybe a smooth one here. But I want to really highlight here in terms of something viewed on a web, something viewed on a smartphone, those types of things, that camera compression does not affect it because they do not they do not display that higher compression anyway. So if anything's going to go on the web, you're just taking up more space by using that fine, that higher compression option. So this concludes the lecture on digital images for the photography module.